Layla and Kareem Elston's love story began like a dream and ended in blood. He was a powerful businessman with everything money could buy. She was a mysterious woman with no past and endless charm, but beneath her beauty hid a chilling secret, a plan so meticulous that even death seemed like part of her design. When Kareem's body was found inside their locked villa, investigators uncovered a web of deceit, stolen identities, and vanishing millions. What started as a fairy tale marriage became one of the most shocking crimes of betrayal and greed the city had ever seen. Kareem Alston had everything a man could want: money, influence, and a name that opened doors in every corner of the city. His empire stretched from real estate to luxury imports, and his signature could turn struggling ventures into thriving successes. Yet, beneath all his accomplishments, there was an emptiness that success couldn't fill. He lived in a mansion of marble and glass, surrounded by people who smiled at his wealth but never reached his heart. Years of brief relationships had left him disillusioned with love, convinced that no one could see him beyond his fortune. Then came Layla, and everything changed. They met at an art exhibition hosted by one of Kareem's business partners. Layla arrived alone, dressed simply but with an elegance that drew every eye in the room. She carried herself with quiet confidence, speaking little and listening intently. When Kareem approached her, expecting the usual charm and flattery, she seemed almost indifferent to his presence. That subtle distance intrigued him more than any affection could have. Over the next hour, he found himself telling her things he hadn't told anyone in years about his childhood, his ambitions, and even the loneliness that trailed him despite all his success. Layla spoke little of her own past. She mentioned that she had recently moved to the city after living abroad, and that her family had been lost in a tragic accident. There was pain behind her eyes, and Kareem saw it as a reflection of his own hidden sorrow. Within days, they began meeting for dinners that stretched into midnight conversations. She seemed to understand him without words, comforting him with silence rather than sympathy. Her mystery drew him closer, and her tenderness made him believe in love again. Their romance moved fast, too fast for the people around him. Kareem's friends warned him that it wasn't like him to rush, that no one knew who this woman really was. But Kareem brushed aside their doubts. He had spent years surrounded by people with motives. For the first time, he had met someone who didn't seem to care about his name or his fortune. He saw purity in her restraint, honesty in her sadness. Within weeks, he proposed to her in a quiet garden overlooking the sea. There were no lavish parties, no media coverage, just a private ceremony attended by a handful of witnesses. The wedding took place at sunset. The golden light reflected off the water, casting a warm glow over the vows they exchanged. To Kareem, it felt like the beginning of peace, a second chance at life beyond business and wealth. But even on that day, there were whispers. A few of his associates noticed the subtle unease in her posture, the way she avoided direct questions about her family or her past. When asked where she had lived before moving to the city, she smiled vaguely and said she preferred to forget that part of her life. No one pressed her further. Kareem's charm and authority silenced doubts before they could grow. After the ceremony, the couple moved into Kareem's coastal villa sprawling home with panoramic views of the ocean. Layla adapted quickly to her new surroundings. She transformed the sterile halls into spaces of warmth, replacing expensive art with personal touches, flowers, candles, photographs of her and Kareem smiling together. To outsiders, they seemed inseparable, the picture of perfect love, but beneath the surface, there were small moments that didn't fit. Late at night, Kareem would find her awake, staring out at the waves as if waiting for something or someone. When he asked what troubled her, she'd respond with a faint smile and return to bed without a word. Despite the odd moments, Kareem convinced himself that he had finally found what he had been missing all along. He believed in her, trusted her, and saw in her eyes the promise of a new beginning. What he couldn't see were the shadows gathering behind that promise, the careful calculations, the hidden intentions, and the truth about who Layla really was. The days that followed their wedding were filled with calm routines that seemed to soothe Kareem's restless soul. Layla slipped seamlessly into the rhythm of his world, hosting elegant dinners and joining him at charity events, always appearing composed, graceful, and attentive. People admired her charm and her quiet intelligence. She learned the names of Kareem's business partners, remembered small details about their families, and earned the admiration of everyone who met her. Kareem's mother, who had always been skeptical of his choices, admitted privately that Layla seemed different, more genuine than anyone before. Yet for all her outward warmth, there was still something unreachably private about her, as though parts of her life remained sealed away behind invisible walls. Layla spent much of her time in the villa's library and study, a grand room overlooking the ocean where Kareem stored financial documents and contracts. She told him she wanted to learn more about his businesses, that understanding his world would help her support him better. Kareem, flattered by her interest, granted her unrestricted access. She spent long hours there, sometimes well past midnight, surrounded by files, ledgers, and account summaries. When the housekeeper entered to offer tea, Layla would quickly close folders and smile politely, saying she was only organizing things for Kareem's convenience. Over time, the staff began to notice her peculiar habits. She never allowed anyone into the study when she was inside. Several times, deliveries arrived under her name in marked boxes containing nothing but papers and envelopes she took upstairs without explanation. On some nights, muffled phone conversations could be heard behind closed doors, her tone hushed and tense. When asked about them, she would dismiss it as calls from distant relatives or old acquaintances trying to reconnect. Karim, wrapped in the comfort of love and the illusion of stability, never questioned her. Outwardly, their marriage appeared blissful. They traveled to Paris for a short honeymoon, attended art auctions in Dubai, and appeared on the cover of a luxury magazine as the city's most captivating couple. Karim's businesses flourished, and with Layla by his side, his reputation reached new heights. But beneath the glamour, small cracks began to show. He noticed that Layla avoided discussions about the future. She never talked about having children or long-term plans. She deflected personal questions with vague answers and steered conversations back to him. One evening, Karim returned home earlier than expected and found Layla in the study, hastily closing his laptop. She smiled and claimed she had been looking through family photos, but he could sense something uneasy in her voice. When he checked the computer later, everything seemed normal until he noticed that several emails had been deleted. He chose not to confront her, telling himself that trust was the foundation of love. Weeks later, a quiet shift occurred. Layla began encouraging Karim to diversify his wealth, suggesting that keeping all his assets under one company was risky. She presented it as concern for his financial safety, insisting that he should move funds to accounts she could help manage discreetly. She reasoned that as his wife, she needed the knowledge and access to protect their future. Her tone was gentle, her logic sound, and Karim, blinded by affection, agreed to let her oversee a small portion of his holdings. It was a decision that would later haunt him. Soon after, a sense of unease spread through the household. One of Karim's longtime employees reported that important financial documents had gone missing. The staff began whispering about strange visitors arriving when Karim was away, men in expensive suits who stayed only 4 minutes before leaving with sealed envelopes. When Karim asked Layla about it, she laughed it off, claiming they were event planners helping her organize an anniversary surprise. Her explanations always seemed just convincing enough to erase his doubts. Despite the subtle warning signs, Karim couldn't bring himself to believe anything sinister. To him, Layla was still the woman who had restored his faith in love. But beneath her calm smile and tender gestures, she was weaving an intricate web. Every act of affection masked another layer of deception, and every word of love carried a hidden purpose. The life of luxury that surrounded them was slowly becoming a stage, carefully designed for an outcome Karim couldn't yet imagine. As the months passed, Karim's empire continued to thrive, but unease began to creep into the background of his perfect life. It started subtly, with financial inconsistencies too small to draw much attention. A few misplaced invoices, slight discrepancies in transfer dates, nothing alarming for a man managing multiple ventures at once. Yet to Karim's financial advisor, Omar, something didn't add up. When he examined the company's overseas accounts, he discovered unusual activity. Steady withdrawals directed to a new offshore entity registered under a name that didn't exist in their records. He assumed it was a clerical mistake, until the amounts began increasing every week. Omar reached out to Karim, who was traveling abroad with Layla at the time. He left messages and emails, none of which received a response. When the couple returned, Karim seemed relaxed and happy, completely unaware of the brewing storm. Omar decided to confront him in person, showing him the irregularities and warning that someone might be siphoning money. Karim brushed it off, confident that it must be a simple administrative error. He promised to review it later but never did. Layla, standing nearby, had listened quietly, her expression unreadable. That evening, she suggested Karim should take a break from business for a while, that he had people to handle such details. A week later, Omar's car was found wrecked along a deserted coastal road. The police ruled it an accident, citing brake failure, but those who knew him found the circumstances strange. His briefcase, which he always carried, was missing. So were his phone and the USB drive he used for financial data. Karim was shaken but accepted the official explanation, telling himself that tragedies sometimes struck without reason. Layla comforted him through his grief, ensuring the matter was quickly settled and the investigation closed. Not long after, Layla's influence over Karim's finances began to grow. She convinced him that, in the wake of Omar's death, he needed to simplify management and reduce risk by consolidating his assets. She persuaded him to sign a series of documents, explaining that they would help her coordinate his business affairs more efficiently. Each paper he signed tightened her control a little more. Her confidence, her calm explanations, her affectionate tone all made her impossible to doubt. But whispers began circulating among Karim's closest associates. One of his managers noticed that Layla had been in contact with a lawyer in another country, requesting legal transfers of ownership. Another reported that sensitive company data had been accessed from Karim's home network late at night. When Karim confronted Layla about it, she responded with gentle laughter, teasing him for being paranoid. He wanted to believe her. He needed to. To suspect her felt like betraying the love he had fought so hard to find. Meanwhile, Layla's demeanor subtly shifted. She became colder, more distant, often locking herself away in the study for hours. Her charm in public remained flawless, but behind closed doors, she seemed detached. Sometimes she disappeared for an entire day, returning with vague explanations about charity, work, or business errands. When Karim questioned her absence, she offered soft reassurances, and his doubts dissolved like sand under waves. Then came the night Karim received a call from his bank's fraud department. They had detected attempts to access high-value accounts through encrypted connections traced back to his own residence. His hands trembled as he hung up the phone. For the first time, he considered the possibility that someone close to him was behind it. He walked through the darkened house, his footsteps echoing against marble floors, searching for Layla. He found her in the study, calmly organizing papers, her face illuminated by the glow of the computer screen. When she looked up, her expression was serene, as if nothing were wrong at all. That night, Karim couldn't sleep. Every unexplained moment, the phone calls, the missing documents, the strange visitors replayed in his mind. But by morning, he convinced himself it was all a misunderstanding. He told himself that love demanded trust, that his heart couldn't survive another betrayal. What he didn't know was that trust was the final lock Layla needed to open every door he had. Each signature, each moment of faith, each dismissal of suspicion brought her one step closer to the end she had planned all along. The night the storm rolled in, the air around the coastal villa felt heavier than usual. Rain lashed against the wide glass windows, and the sea below roared with a restless fury. Karim sat alone in the study, staring at the flickering flames in the fireplace. He hadn't seen Layla all evening. Earlier, she had said she was meeting an event planner to discuss an upcoming charity gala, but that had been hours ago. Her phone went unanswered, and a dull sense of dread began to stir in his chest. When she finally walked through the door, her hair soaked and her expression unreadable, she seemed distant, detached. She moved past him silently and disappeared into the bedroom. Karim followed a few minutes later, wanting to talk, to understand why their once perfect marriage felt as if it were dissolving into something he couldn't recognize. But the tension between them was unspoken and thick. The rain hammered the roof as thunder shook the walls. For the first time, he allowed himself to confront the thoughts he had been suppressing: the strange transactions, Omar's mysterious death, the missing documents, and Layla's late-night activities. Everything that had seemed like coincidence now felt like a pattern he could no longer ignore. When he entered the study again, hoping to clear his mind, he noticed something odd. The safe where he kept sensitive papers was slightly open. He approached it slowly, heart pounding. Inside, several folders were missing: contracts, property deeds, and his will. He called out for Layla, but the house remained silent, except for the relentless rain. Moments later, he heard a faint noise behind him. When he turned, she was standing at the doorway, her expression calm, her eyes dark with something cold and determined. He tried to question her, his voice breaking between disbelief and fear. She said nothing, simply moved toward him with deliberate composure. What followed unfolded too quickly to process. In the chaos that erupted, the sound of shattering glass and overturned furniture echoed through the villa. Neighbors later reported hearing what they thought was a struggle, followed by silence that lasted through the storm. By morning, the storm had subsided, leaving the villa eerily quiet. When officers arrived after receiving a call from a concerned neighbor, the front door was locked from the inside. They forced it open and were met with a scene that froze them in place. The once pristine living room was in disarray, broken vases scattered across the floor, the remnants of a violent confrontation. In the center of it all lay Karim's lifeless body. A marble statue, one that had decorated the entryway since his wedding, was stained dark and resting near his head. Layla was found sitting on the couch, her hands trembling, a cut on her forehead, and her dress torn. She claimed she and Karim had been attacked by intruders during the night. According to her account, masked men had entered the house, demanding access to the safe. She said Karim tried to fight them off but was struck down, and she only managed to escape when they fled as the storm intensified. Her story seemed plausible at first. The room bore signs of a struggle, and she had visible bruises. But the officers noticed inconsistencies: no signs of forced entry, no footprints leading in or out, and no fingerprints that didn't belong to the couple. As forensic investigators examined the scene, they found more anomalies. The safe showed no indication of tampering, the locks on the doors were intact, and every window was sealed shut from the inside. The only person unaccounted for during the entire night had been Layla herself. Her injuries appeared shallow, almost deliberate. The officer in charge noted how calm she seemed for someone who had supposedly survived a home invasion and watched her husband die. When she was taken in for questioning, she maintained her story with remarkable consistency, her tone measured and sorrowful. The media quickly seized on the tragedy: another mysterious death in a mansion, a beautiful widow claiming innocence, and a fortune now left in her name. Behind the cameras, though, detectives began to suspect that the storm outside had not been the only one raging that night. Within those walls, a darker tempest had been building for months, and by the time it finally broke, it had left only destruction in its wake. The investigation into Karim's death consumed the city. At first, public sympathy leaned toward Layla, the grieving widow whose story painted her as a survivor of a brutal break-in. She appeared in news coverage dressed in black, her face pale and composed, her voice trembling just enough to seem sincere. But behind closed doors, detectives were uncovering a different version of events, one that began long before the night of the storm. The first cracks in her account appeared when police examined the surveillance system installed at the villa. The footage from the night of the murder had been erased, but technicians managed to recover fragments from the hard drive. What they found was startling. Hours before the alleged intruders arrived, Layla was seen walking through the house alone, turning off cameras one by one. Another recovered frame showed her moving a heavy object across the living room, the same marble statue later found beside Kareem's body. Investigators also discovered faint traces of gun oil on her clothing, even though no firearm had been used in the crime. The picture was becoming clear. There had been no break-in. As they dug deeper, detectives traced Layla's background, determined to uncover who she really was. The passport she had used to marry Kareem turned out to be a sophisticated forgery. Her listed birthplace didn't exist, and her supposed family members could not be located. Immigration records showed she had entered the country under a different name 5 years earlier, and under yet another identity 3 years before that. Each alias was connected to a different city, and in each, a wealthy man had died under suspicious circumstances. One had fallen from a balcony. Another had suffered a heart attack days after adding her name to his will. Each case had been ruled accidental, until now. Detectives pieced together the trail of deception. Layla had spent years crafting new identities, perfecting the art of blending into the lives of rich, lonely men. Her marriages followed a pattern: quick romances, sudden tragedies, and the quiet transfer of wealth to accounts only she could access. The funds she stole were distributed across multiple offshore havens, making them nearly impossible to trace. It was a pattern too precise to be chance. She was a strategist, using charm as a weapon and marriage as a means to acquire fortune and freedom. The revelation hit the public like a shockwave. The woman once portrayed as a victim was now being painted as a calculating creditor. Media outlets ran headlines about her hidden past, calling her the widow of wealth. Old acquaintances came forward with fragments of memory, snippets of conversation that now seemed sinister in hindsight. Yet through it all, Layla remained eerily calm. During interrogations, she denied every accusation, insisting she loved Kareem and that the evidence had been twisted to destroy her. Her composure unsettled even the most seasoned investigators. When financial analysts reviewed Kareem's accounts, they confirmed massive transfers made in the weeks leading up to his death. Millions had vanished into shell corporations registered in countries with strict privacy laws. Layla claimed ignorance, suggesting that Kareem had business dealings she knew nothing about, but her fingerprints were found on several authorization documents. She had signed them using a forged version of his signature, a detail so convincing that even the bank had not detected it at first. The prosecution built its case meticulously, supported by digital trails, false identities, and financial fraud. Yet Layla's defense team painted a different story, one of manipulation, domestic tension, and self. They argued that Kareem had discovered her past and attacked her in rage, leading to a fatal struggle. Without direct eyewitnesses, the case became a battle of narratives. As her trial approached, public fascination turned to obsession. Reporters camped outside the courthouse, eager for a glimpse of the woman who had fooled everyone. She arrived each day immaculate and poised, her every movement scrutinized and analyzed. To some, she was a monster. To others, a misunderstood survivor shaped by trauma and circumstance. But those who had seen the evidence knew the truth ran deeper. The night Kareem died was not the climax of her story, it was the end of one chapter and the beginning of another that no one yet understood. The courtroom was packed on the morning the verdict was to be delivered. Months of investigation and weeks of trial had turned Layla's case into a national spectacle. Every seat was filled with journalists, lawyers, and spectators drawn by morbid fascination. Outside, crowds gathered behind barricades, holding signs and demanding justice for Kareem, others insisting Layla had been framed. Inside, the air felt heavy with anticipation. Layla sat motionless at the defense table, her eyes forward, her expression unreadable. She looked untouched by the chaos around her, dressed in a simple gray suit that made her appear almost fragile. Yet beneath that composure was a stillness that felt calculated, as though she already knew what would happen. The evidence against her was overwhelming. Digital forensics had traced the money transfers directly to accounts opened under one of her previous identities. The recovered security footage from the villa showed her disabling the cameras before the night of the storm. Expert witnesses confirmed the forged signatures on Kareem's documents matched her handwriting. Even her injuries, those faint bruises and shallow cuts, were determined to have been self-inflicted. Every piece of the puzzle pointed to premeditation, to a woman who had meticulously planned every step of her deception. When the judge read the verdict, guilty of first-degree murder and fraud, the courtroom erupted. Some gasped, others cheered, but Layla didn't flinch. Her face remained expressionless as the sentence was read aloud. Life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Reporters shouted her name as guards led her away, but she didn't look back. In that moment, she seemed untouchable, as if she had accepted the outcome long before anyone else had. In prison, Layla's story continued to captivate the public. True crime documentaries dissected her motives, and newspapers published long features about her manipulative brilliance. Psychologists analyzed her behavior, calling her a rare blend of intelligence and emotional detachment. Her calm demeanor earned her the nickname the Marble Widow. Despite her confinement, she remained a figure of fascination. Letters flooded the prison, some from admirers, others from those seeking to understand how she had managed to deceive so completely. She replied to none of them. Yet even behind bars, the mystery surrounding her deepened. Investigators attempting to recover Karim's stolen fortune found that much of it remained untraceable. Several of the accounts she had opened were empty, and the money had been moved elsewhere before her arrest. The trail went cold, leading many to suspect she had helped an accomplice who had escaped unnoticed. Others believed she had hidden the funds in plain sight, waiting for the right time to reclaim them. Then, 2 years into her sentence, something extraordinary happened. During a routine morning roll call, prison guards discovered that Layla was missing. Her cell door was locked. The cameras showed nothing unusual, and no sign of forced escape was found. A single object lay on her neatly made bed, Karim's wedding ring, placed at the center of her pillow. The news spread instantly, reigniting the public's obsession. How had she vanished from a maximum security facility? Some claimed she had bribed officials. Others whispered that she had died and her escape was a cover-up. No body was ever found, no trace of her beyond that single symbol of her marriage. The case eventually went cold, but rumors continued to circulate. In cities across Europe and the Middle East, there were reported sightings of a woman who looked like her, always elegant, always alone, living under different names. None of the leads were ever confirmed. To this day, Karim's fortune remains missing, his empire dissolved, and his death a mystery clouded by unanswered questions. In the end, the world was left divided about who Layla truly was. Some saw her as a heartless manipulator who destroyed everyone who trusted her. Others believed she was a survivor shaped by a world that had never shown her mercy. But one thing was certain, her story did not end in that prison cell. Whether she escaped through cunning, death, or illusion, Layla became a ghost of her own making, a woman who vanished into the shadows, leaving behind a trail of wealth, ruin, and the haunting memory of a love built entirely on lies.